Hey y'all, my name is Jess. This is my greenhouse here at Roots Refuge Farm. If you're new here, welcome. If you're not, welcome back. Today's video is admittedly going to be a bit of a divergence from my normal content. Maybe not. I guess maybe looking back over the last 4 years, I've probably kind of gone here a couple of times, but not super routinely. And today I want to just have a really frank discussion with you while I plant some flowers. I've got a tray set up here. This is actually just a recycled tray that I had ordered some plugs and I'm just reusing it. And I'm starting some zinnia seeds and calendula and some hollyhocks and just a variety of things, some amaranth that's all going to be out in our cottage garden. So today I want to talk about preparation. I want to talk about food and wisdom, and I want to do that by sharing my own journey into those things. I typically leave anything that might stir fear in people off of my channel. I really believe that there's power in refuge and also an example, and I would love to be a place where people come and learn without having a cord of fear struck in them. That's very important to me. And over the course of this winter, I have done more content about maybe preparedness than I have in the past. But I want to have a frank conversation about these things today and my own experience with them. I do feel like I should go ahead and say, just because if you're new here, you might not know this about me. And I would implore you to please hear out what I'm about to say before you click off of it. But I am a Christian. That very much shapes my view of this topic. It's true. It does. And my own personal beliefs biblically shape my view of this topic very much as well. I do not feel like we have to agree with people to find value in their story. That means that my table is a place that I would like to welcome anybody, whether they agree with me or not. You do not have to worship my God to sit at my table. However, when I talk about this topic, that's not something that I can separate to make people more comfortable. And I value you. I want you to know that. Whether you are someone who does not believe in the God I believe in, or if you do and you view him differently. There are plenty of people who are Christians that see things differently than I do. It doesn't matter to me. You are welcome at my table, and my hope is that by earnestly offering that invitation to all people, that I can also be who I am fully too, and that can be honored in the same way that I'm willing to honor people. And I have found that it is. I have found that when you genuinely love people and you don't need them to be like you in order to love them, people love you back. And that's just been my experience. So a lot of times if I'm going to be talking about something faith related, I will like put that as a devotional, but I don't really feel like I'm preaching right now. I'm kind of sharing my experience, and I'm not really going to tiptoe around my experience because it's mine. So I'm going to be honest with you and my experience. It includes aspects of my faith. Today, I woke up and saw yet another headline about food shortages. This time it was a presidential release about the reality of upcoming food shortages. I saw another thing that was talking about the fact that we've seen at least a 15% rise of food cost. And I've seen a lot of things talking about more on the horizon, like more of a rise on the horizon. And here I am with this channel teaching people how to grow food. Obviously it's important to me, but I don't know that I've really gone into depth on my journey to this point. And it's hard because I'm really feeling this pull now. And I guess you could say it's like an urgency, I guess, but it's not. I'm not afraid. Right now I'm going to talk to you about food shortages and how I feel that it's very much time for us to be very serious about growing food, and I'm planting flowers. So I hope that kind of gives you some understanding of where I am. I'm planting a lot of food too, but my personal goal in growing food is and always has been that I desire to thrive and not just survive. So whenever COVID happened, I wasn't afraid, like going to the grocery stores and seeing the shelves empty. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was afraid. There was definitely fear that came up, but I wasn't afraid about, oh, what would happen if I couldn't get food. And when we were going to the grocery stores and there was a 2-package limit on meat, and of course all of the family packs were gone, and I have 5 sons to feed, obviously 2 pounds of meat for 5 sons is like the meal. I wasn't really bothered by that because I had meat in my freezer. So we were prepared at that point, and we had really felt led to be prepared, but it wasn't a matter of like we had fearfully prepared. We had prepared because in the life that we see as thriving, you are prepared because you have food, and it's not just survival food. It's good food that's good for your body, and so that's kind of where we're going today. In 2014, my husband Jeremiah, I call him Sweet Maya or Maya. We had the first week of 2014 in January. We were on a date night. We were at Barnes & Noble. And we had no money. We were so broke. Our date night was going to Barnes & Noble, and there was a Starbucks in there, and we would budget like $10, and we would like each get a drink, and then we would get books at the bookstore, and we would sit and read them while we drank the coffee, and then we would leave the books and leave. That was the date night. It was $10. That was the date night budget. And we were sitting at this table in this cafe, and I was reading this book about backyard homesteading. The Backyard Homestead, I think, is what it's called. I still have the book. I own it now. I eventually bought it. But at this particular time, I couldn't afford to buy it. And I was sitting and reading this, and I just began to cry. And it was actually over this spread that was about butchering pigs. It was just like, it was not like a romantic thing. It was just like these pictures of the cuts of a hog. And I wanted it so badly that I just literally began crying. Like, it's dropping on the book, and I'm like, oh gosh, I had to close it because I didn't want to mess it up because I know I couldn't buy it. And I remember telling Jeremiah, I was like, I want this so badly it hurts. It feels so urgent to me, and I cannot understand why. And I was like, and it's impossible. At the time, we lived in a rental house owned by my dad in town. We were doing ministry. Jeremiah was working for our church doing youth ministry. And I was a student, and I had kind of a budding photography business. And we just were like plugging along, you know, I mean, like doing our best, and all of our food was purchased at the grocery store. You know, there was a couple of things. I had done a little bit of gardening, you know, in containers and small little garden beds. I'd tried a couple times and just failed miserably. And we would go at that point, occasionally we would go out and like buy raw milk at this little gas station store that was out in the middle of nowhere. And, but even that, we couldn't really justify doing a lot because it was over an hour drive, and given the cost, we just couldn't afford to do that a lot. I wanted to grow food so badly. I would forage blackberries, and I remember I would take like a $20 budget to the farmer's market and try to get something, and especially if I could get something like marked down or ugly looking to be able to learn to preserve, I would do that. But it was just this desperate longing of my heart to have a homestead and grow food. And I remember this conversation that happened around that time with Maya, where it was kind of this moment of surrender. It was kind of this thing of like, I can't make this happen, you know, and just like taking it in prayer and being like, I have to believe that this desire is in my heart for a reason. I have to believe that if I feel so urgently about something, it's not going to remain impossible. I remember that moment of just kind of like letting go and even thinking, I'm going to do everything I can where I am. And it doesn't always go so neat, but in this particular instance, it did. A few weeks later, my dad called me and asked me to give him a ride. He had to go drop his car off at the shop or something like that. And we drove past this house with a big red barn, and it was for sale. And he said, maybe you should check that out. And we had already been denied for one load because our income was too low for a different house. And I was just at this place of resolve of like, I can't have what I desire. And so I'm just going to do what I can until I can have what I desire. I'm going to be thankful for where I'm at. I remember going afterwards, I dropped my dad off and I drove back home that same way, and I drove back by the red barn, and I thought, I'm just going to call and see. And so we do, and we found out it was like a HUD foreclosure, and it was really cheap. It was actually within the really low cap of our budget. And I called my husband, and he came and met me, and we looked, and just immediately my mind just goes wild with dreams. Oh my gosh, this could be possible. And there's this really weird place whenever you have wanted something so badly that you can't have it, and you get, I call it heart sickness. And it's this place of like not being able to do what you desperately want to. So in order to protect yourself, you just sort of shut down hoping for anything, because hope is a dangerous thing. It can gut you more than just about anything else, is to hope and then be let down. So I was at that place of like, oh my gosh, I bravely hoped. And we put an offer in on this house, and someone else put an offer in right before, and they got the house. We didn't get the house. And I was crushed. I was devastated. But that house led Maya to explore the foreclosure site. And he found the house that we ended up buying, which was our first farm. And so the first few years of videos on our channel were at that foreclosed house that we had bought. We moved into our farm, our first farm in Arkansas. This is 2014. And I am dumbfounded that, like, it's happening. Oh my gosh, I have a farm. I have blackberries growing down the roadside. I got 3 chickens. And I just thought my world had been made. My dreams had come true. And I so wanted to just like dive into building the farm right away then, but of course we had to like get the house livable. And I remember it was August 14th of 2014. Maya and I were sitting on the couch one night, and we were talking about growing food. And we were just in this really deep conversation. I began to share with him at that point. At the time, I didn't really have language for it because I hadn't experienced it a whole lot. I call it now knowing in your knower. Some people call it being prophetic. Some people call it just intuition, or just like following your gut. I mean, I really believe that it's the Lord speaking to us through the Holy Spirit. But I used to describe it as words just coming up out of your belly that you kind of bypass your brain. And I had one of those instances where we're just sitting there talking, and I began to tell him, I really feel like it's very important that we prepare. I don't know what for. I don't know what that would look like, but really, I just feel like this is important. I really feel like we should grow food and teach people how to grow food. And at the time, I didn't have any of this. Like, I didn't have any platform at all. I mean, I was taking birth photos. I wasn't teaching anybody anything like this stuff. I don't know, but whatever happened in that conversation, though it had always been a desire of my heart to have a farm for a very long time, and I had felt this urgency, I had never really felt that thing. I had never really felt like, oh, this is super important. It was always just a thing I wanted to do. It was always like a fascination of mine and a passion of mine. You know, like kind of gotten off into the brokenness of the food system and reading labels and eating whole food and locally sourcing. I'd been kind of dabbling in that, but it was never this like oomph of like, we have to do this. This is what we're supposed to be doing. Until that moment. And it's why I remember the date. It was just a really impactful date for us. We then had this like, the oomph. We had the thing. We were like, oh, this is what we're supposed to be doing. And instead of allowing that to grow us in trust, we started to fill in the blanks. And we started to think, oh, if we're supposed to be growing food, it must be because something really bad's going to happen. If we're supposed to be growing food, it must be because otherwise we'll starve. And like, it was this very like fear-driven thing. It wasn't good. It was not healthy. And we got so scared. And we spent the next 2 years going into debt, getting way over our head. You know, at one point we had like 100 and something chickens, and like, I mean, it was just like so silly. And in retrospect, I genuinely was in this place of thinking, we gotta have this, or like the people we care about are gonna starve. And I mean, it's just so not what was happening. I mean, truly, I do feel like we were feeling led to grow food, but we were also feeling an invitation to grow in trust and peace and joy. And basically, I feel like that was really an invitation to come and thrive instead of a threat. You better move or you're not going to survive. And so we had this like really rough couple years. It was painful. It really was. It was just like full of pain, and we learned a lot of stuff, you know, namely what not to do, but we did learn a lot of stuff, and there was a lot of fulfillment that happened in that. It's just really covered in grace. And it was kind of towards the end of that we sort of resettled ourselves, and we're like, okay, let's get to the place of learning lessons. And we went through a lot of stuff that led to us starting our YouTube channel. And I really feel like the YouTube channel came once we settled in to the piece of like, let's thrive. When I was being shoved by fear into a direction, it was not a good direction to go. But whenever I stopped and said, I'm a student with faith and trust that my family is going to be okay, and I'm not going to live my life in survival mode, that is really whenever the resources came to me to be able to thrive. The YouTube channel started to take off, and we started to really see that some of the dreams that we'd had for like teaching people at large how to grow food were like totally possible, that this was something that we were really going to get to walk out in our life. I was experiencing just this incredible fulfillment and wholeness from the garden and the homestead and growing food on a small scale. And the fact that it slowed down the pace, and the fact that it took me out of the man-made world. And kind of prior to that, I dealt with just tremendous anxiety. I used to not be able to go in the grocery store without having headphones, and I would have like certain audiobooks that I would listen to that would be very calming to me, because just the noise and the stimulus from the grocery store was like really hard for me. And I was dealing with a lot of these things, and I found that kind of getting rooted in that homestead pace and rooted in the garden and the peace that I found in the garden, and all of this, of course, tied into fulfillment of promise and the things that I'd prayed for, and feeling loved by God, and like all the stuff that came with that, it really quelled some issues that I really struggled with for my entire life, as far as anxiety goes, and depression and different things like that. And I found that with the rhythms of the garden and the homestead, there was so much healing for me personally. So I tell you all of that backstory because I feel often that people look at us in the position that we're in now and they do not relate. And I mean, I know, like, we're building this farm super fast. We're throwing everything we've got at it. And I think a lot of people are like, yeah, but that's not what my situation is. I'm in the backyard of a neighborhood, or I'm living with family, or, you know, I'm in an apartment. And I feel like people go, well, yeah, it's working for them, but obviously I shouldn't even try because it's not going to work for me. And I feel like it's very important. I don't want to be disconnected from our backstory, because it's a very huge part of the story of getting where we are. And whenever headlines are scary and prices are soaring and people are wondering, how in the world am I going to be able to do what I need to do for my family, for my kids, for myself, it's not the time to feel disqualified. That's just such a detriment to being willing to move forward and willing to hope. Prior to 2020, I was starting to dream these kind of like audacious dreams, really. Like, I was starting to have these hopes and this vision and this desire. And it started with this idea of doing kind of like a learning center. It started with this idea of teaching people to grow food. And of course, I'm watching our resources and our reach grow on this dream that prior to those resources and reach, it felt truly impossible. And I'm sitting here going, oh, this might actually be possible. Well, what else could be possible? And I really just started to imagine a culture that wasn't dependent on a very broken food system and a very broken medical system, and a culture that maybe wasn't so driven by greed and corruption. And I just started to kind of imagine what that would look like community and the hope of that rhythm of the garden. And I was really just dreaming a lot about that. And then COVID started, and COVID happened in March 2020, just 2 years ago. I realized that cultures can change so quickly, and it made me very brave. It made me think, wow, obviously we're seeing some very negative change now, but this drastic of a change is possible. And what would it look like for this drastic of a change to happen in a positive trend towards wholeness and wellness and family and a slower pace and a more natural way of living, a more sustainable and holistic way of living. And I just began to really apply that. Like, wow, I see that this big change is possible. This viral change is possible in a short period of time. So what if this was a change towards wholeness, and what would that look like? And I just really began to imagine that. And of course, 2021, we moved out here to South Carolina and we began building our farm. And during this process, we're dealing with the aftermath of everything that's been going on, and we're dealing with now current events. And I'm not going to get political about that. I have my own beliefs about it, and I don't think that really matters to the message that I'm saying, that right now there is inevitably an issue with food. I mean, like the prices are going up, and it's inevitably an issue for people. And I am hearing the concern in people who are saying, I don't know what I'm going to. And right now I'm reading all of these things about the rising cost in fertilizers and the rising cost in farming and fuel and all the different things, and how this is going to come down the line. And I'll be completely frank with you, I've tried to listen to some of the people who are warning about this stuff. I've tried to listen to some of the numbers people that can explain that. And I find that it really strikes a lot of fear in me. It does, because some of those people are coming from a place of fear. Some aren't. Some are strictly coming from a place of their expertise. They're giving information that I feel like is very unbiased. But it still strikes a lot of fear in me. Not even necessarily at this point for myself, but just the compassion that I feel for people and the hopelessness that I can feel that this just brings up in our culture. And the whole point of this, and what I really want to talk about, is hope. I really want to talk about our power that we have, and the ability to say, I see this, and this is an issue, and this is the story that I'm going to live through. We are living through things that we probably didn't anticipate. I mean, I know I certainly didn't anticipate the last 2 years. And now we're watching all of these things, and we're seeing headlines that say shortage. And what lack does to the human mind is throws it immediately into survival mode. When you are told you are going to experience lack, it makes you want to hang on to everything. It makes you want to say, oh my God, what can I do to soften the blow of the lack? And thriving goes so far out the window, and community often goes so far out the window, and fear just rises up when you are guaranteed lack. And that's what's happening right now. I mean, I'm seeing these headlines saying, lack is real, lack is coming, get ready for the lack you're going to live through. There may be some truth to that, but I think we have to, as brilliant beings that have the ability to make choice and create and to walk in peace, even in struggle, we have to stop and say, okay, lack may be going to exist, but I'm going to be the refuge in the lack. And I really feel like this is a message for people. In the midst of this, I want to implore you guys, do not give up your hope, because a lot of people, guys, have been hearing for years now, start growing food. A lot of people have been. Do you know how many people I hear from on a regular basis that the moment that they saw the empty shelves in March of 2020, they went and planted a garden, and now they're planting their third-year garden. You want to know what third-year gardeners can do? They can do a lot. They have learned a lot at that point. They can grow food for their family, and they can probably even grow food for other families by 3 years, because they're not brand new anymore. They've learned a lot of lessons. They've learned some things that work for them. And that gives me so much hope to know that there are rooted people out there creating refuge. And that though there may be lack on the horizon, or even the reality of lack now, that does not have to be our portion. It really doesn't have to be that. And I know I'm talking kind of cryptically, and I don't mean to do that. I tend to be kind of poetic when it comes to this stuff. I just have to be a voice of encouragement. I need to tell you that even small efforts are valuable efforts. Even just learning to can food, even just learning to forage blackberries on the roadside, even just reading these books and having the knowledge, because you don't know what resources might lie ahead for you if you're prepared to take hold of them. I don't think I ever could have had a successful YouTube channel if I was still just diving headlong into debt out of fear and trying to just fearfully build up as much as I could for my immediate circle. I could have had it. That would not have been for me. But it was from the place of being seated in a restful place and being in peace and knowing I can do so much with just what's in front of me, that then that door opened to say, okay, teach that message. I really feel like what I want to say is, yes, we should be growing food. I think that that's an unarguable thing at this point, that there is a lot of freedom in having food at your home. And not just in a sense of like, oh, you better have it or you're going to starve, but there's a lot of freedom from the push of fear and having food growing at your home. Even if it's just small garden beds, a few small garden beds, even if it's just a few chickens, even if you're keeping quail, if you're keeping rabbits and learning to butcher rabbits, just some food sustainability is brilliant. And it is such a buffer to the what ifs. What if this happened? That's less scary when you're not fully dependent on that thing. I want to be able to talk about that, and I want to be able to show you, here's what you should have in your kitchen, and here's what you should have in your pantry, and here's how to go about this, and here's some lessons in learning to cook from scratch. But more than anything at this point in time, the thing that I feel extremely compelled to share with you is that you have something to share, and you very well may be the lifeline that keeps a person in hope and understanding the power of their choices versus them getting pushed by fear into a corner. Because ultimately, that's where we're at. I mean, like, so many people are going, oh my God, this is so scary. I'm going to stick my head in the sand because I cannot handle the fear of it. And people with their head in the sand, things being very hard, can sneak up on them. And I think we have to have the compassion to say, hey, don't be afraid. Let's look at what we can do to give you some power in this situation, to give you some freedom in this situation, and to use whatever resource you have in this moment. Because, you know, somebody out there, I'm going to tell you, somebody out there has got 30-year-old pear trees in their yard, but they're too old to lift a canner and to bend over that many times to pick those pear trees. So what if you had the knowledge on how to can, and you had the strong back to pick up the pears in the canner, and you partnered with that person, and then you put food in your pantry and in theirs? Those situations are everywhere. And they might require some resourcefulness, and they might require letting go of the ideal way of doing things. You might not have a place to put in garden beds, but if you have a person, let's say a person that has really small babies and they cannot put in garden beds and they cannot work a garden, they don't have the time, but they're also thinking, I really need to do something. Where can there be partnership in this? Where can there be working together to learn and grow? What things can you be doing right now to lay hold of your own freedom of choice and the ability to say, no, I can do something. I don't have to be afraid of these rising costs. I can start plants, and so I'm going to start plants enough that there can be access to these for people who live in a smaller space, who don't have the capacity to buy all this infrastructure, to build the greenhouse, to buy the grow lights. What if I had enough extra that they could have food growing in their yard also? And even just selling those plants to people, giving them the option, there's power in that, and there's hope in that. I don't want to pretend like there's not a reason for concern. You know, I've been trying to make videos that keep people in a place of calm, that make this accessible and obtainable. I do want to validate that if you feel a sense of urgency to grow food, that's real. I think that that's really real. But I was talking to a friend of mine this morning, and I don't feel like it's an urgency in a sense of like, be afraid, you know, the big bad wolf's coming to get you. I think it's more a sense of like, it's just the time to do this. When I look at my phone and I know I have an appointment at 2 o'clock, and I realize, oh, it's 1:10 and it's a 50-minute drive, that same urgency rises up in me because it's time to move. It's time to go. I'm not afraid of getting into the car and going to the appointment. That's not the same thing. Urgency does not always mean fear. A lot of times it's just the prompting that says, hey, it's time to move. It's time to move on this thing. And an appointed time of a thing will cause urgency in you. So if you're feeling that urgency, I want to say, hey, that's good. I'm so glad you're feeling that. That's right. I really, really feel, I'm hearing people, I'm feeling this urgency, but I want to save you from the heartache that I lived through to go, urgency must mean something bad is coming. Urgency must mean I need to move in fear. Urgency must mean I need to step out of wisdom and do everything I absolutely can, even if I know that it's a bad decision. So let's stop and say, urgency means I need to be prepared for whatever resources lie in front of me. Urgency means that I need to think of my neighbor. And urgency means I need to say, what can I do that will put me in a place where lack does not hit me, but also potentially what can I do to divert some of the lack that exists. And honestly, guys, sometimes it's going to be planting flowers, and that doesn't have to make sense. And sometimes it's saying, you know, I've got 2,000 square feet here, I'm going to fill it up with potatoes, even though that's more than my family can eat. And sometimes it's going to be making a video and sharing the truth of your situation and the story that got you there. I got to this place because I realized the urgency that it was time to begin preparing refuge and getting rooted and growing food and changing the way that my family consumed from the culture. Like, that was something that started this journey, was this thing of, hey, it's time to do this. I don't have to know exactly why. I don't have to know exactly what that looks like, but it's time to do this thing. And that has never been, since realizing I'm not going to do this in fear, I'm only going to do this in wisdom, that has never been at the cost of thriving. Because I don't think that's what we're supposed to be doing. And my honest belief is this is just the way that God designed us to live. Like, He designed us for the garden. And so I think that if I'm growing food and I'm stewarding the earth and I'm caring for the soil and I'm caring for animals and I'm growing the garden and we're living kind of in this symbiosis with all living things and our part of permaculture, which is the study of living things. Like, if we're living in that place, I'm just doing what I was designed to do anyway. So it doesn't matter if the big bad wolf of lack is coming. Like, he can't knock on my door because I live in abundance. And so that's the place I want to tell you guys, like, this can be possible. And if enough people who have the willingness to just say, I'm going to be in position to steward whatever gets laid on my plate. If enough people will get that and say, I'm going to thrive, I'm not going to be ruled by the idea of lack. I'm not going to be shoved around by fear. I'm going to grow what I can. I'm going to do this. If enough people do that, therein lies the solution to the problem. And as much as it is so hard, like watching the suffering that is taking place in the earth right now, like, I am still believing this audacious hope that there could be a turnaround for this, that we could see like a revival of sorts and a restoration and a redemption of that pain and suffering, and that we could see people coming into a place of wholeness. And I really, really believe that. I think that if you've been here with me long, you probably know that's true, just based on the fruit of my life. I mean, your life is always going to reflect what you believe. And like, the fruit of my life is that I really, really have a great sense of hope for the future and for people as a whole. All of that, I know that was rambly, and I hope that it was clear in what I want to say, because what I really wanted to get across right now is, yes, there is a sense of urgency. Yes, there is a need. And yes, there are headlines that promise lack, and I'm sure that that lack is going to exist. But I think that right now, making the choice to do what you can where you are is carving out little places that lack is not going to touch. And it's giving freedom from fear, and it's giving options. And if those who are on their third year of gardening say today, you know, I'm going to plant what I need plus some, and those who have felt that urgency for the last however many years, and that have gone down the journey of preparation, if they'll say, yeah, I'm not going to be afraid of lack, I'm going to create abundance, that there is a solution in that. So there's my big vulnerable spiel. I hope that you feel encouraged and not afraid. I do want to talk more about preparation. I want to talk more about being equipped and prepared. And I also want to just turn on videos and get excited about flowers and colorful greenhouses and all of that stuff. I mean, that's still very much my heart, because that's very much my experience. And I want to be able to talk about both. And I want you to know why I can. Because I don't anticipate lack. I anticipate abundance. And in my experience, when I position my heart in rest and I say, God, I trust you, that's what He gives me, is an abundant life. And I want that for you too. So thank you for hanging out with me today. If you've made it this far, I applaud you. I bless you. And it is my deepest desire to see you blessed. Until next time.